Good morning, students. So, Balachandra, you can start the session.
All right. Thanks, Chandana.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
So, good morning, everyone. So, this is Bala, and I'm a trainer in XLR Institute. So, I do have a 13 years plus of experience in XLR Institute. So, as part of this program, we do have a current session for 5 days that includes Linux introduction and the cloud computing. All right. So, today let's understand on the Linux basics. Okay. Let's start with that. So, we'll be starting with the module of introduction to Linux. So I hope some people might have aware of Linux and some people might have not. So everyone are mostly familiar with Windows operating system, right? So what is an operating system? Anyone had an idea? So operating system is a collection of software that manages the compute hardware resources and provide common services for compute programs, right? Chandana, you are able to see my Linux screen, right? The PPT?
Yes, Bala.
Okay, yeah. Yep. So operating system is a collection of software that manages the computer, hardware, and the resources. In the same way, we have a different operating systems that just came into a market into the technology. So that's when Linux is also one such kind of an operating system that is used to interact with the computer hardware, right? So Linux is one such kind of an operating system that we are trying to understand now. Okay. So you can see the operating system is something where user is trying to access some application and the application is being installed in some particular computers which is trying to handle with the help of an operating system. So system is the mediation between the front end applications and the back end hardware, which try to perform the operations like process management, interrupts, memory management, file system, device drivers, the networking operations, security management, and the input output management. Okay. So it is basically acting as an interface between software and different parts of the computer hardware. Okay. So the operating system is designed in such a way that it can manage the overall resources and operations of the computer. So basically, it is trying to perform a specialized programs that handle all the operations of particular computer, or we can try to tell as a server. Okay. So it basically controls and monitors the execution of all other programs that reside in the computer. Okay. So as I told, we have a different softwares, operating system softwares, which are like Windows is a popular one, and the Linux is the next one, and we have a Mac operating system, right? Macintosh. So these are we are calling as an operating system. So when coming to the Linux, what is Linux? Okay, Linux is something which is nothing but a Unix-like operating system. Okay, Linux is something like Unix-like operating system. That means it is derived from the word called Unix, which is Unix is an old version. So it's an open source operating system assembled under the model of a free and open source software development and distribution. That means Linux operating system is free. That means the source code is free to access and free to modify. That means we will be able to access the source code. We can try to modify and design based on the requirement, how we want to develop as per the project. Okay. So this kind of operating system is popular nowadays into major computing platforms as well. And this operating system is being integrated with several computers, servers, mainframes, even the mobile application devices and the embedded devices. Okay. So it is one of the popular model nowadays. So these operating systems share the Linux kernel. All right. Linux kernel. So it is working on the concept of a Linux kernel. So for example, what is Windows operating system? How are we trying to operate it? Basically, Windows operating system in general, maybe you are trying to use a Windows operating systems, right? So we are trying to access in the form of a graphical user interface, correct? Graphical user interface means I can try to open the file explorer. I can try to, click on some options and it is trying to get on open, and you can try to install some specific applications. Everything is something graphical user interface, which is easy to understand, which is easy to access, correct? So that is a graphical user interface based operating system. Now, this Linux is a command line interface based. Okay, command line interface means you're trying to access your computer or the server directly through a command line interface. So command line interface is a direct access to your computer. It's where you ask the software to perform some specific hardware actions that graphical user interface trying to perform. Okay, simply you are accessing the Windows computer, Windows software system with a graphical user interface with some mouse clicks and trying to access the folders with some specific operations, right? And this Linux is something we are trying to access the computer operations with the help of a command line interface. Okay. So for example, if I want to open some, file explorer or something like that, I'm trying to click on, you can see something like a very similar interface where you can try to see all the options in a user interface. But Linux is not like that. Linux is something, it looks like a command line interface. Okay. Command line interface means it looks something like this, where you need to perform all the operations. You can see this is a command line interface. I need to type some commands. It will try to execute in the Linux operating system, so that it will try to create files, it will try to create folders, it will try to copy the operations, it will try to cut the operations, file permissions, user permissions, network operations, everything I'm trying to do with the command line interface. How it is possible? With the help of a Linux operating system, that is you are trying to install any computer or any server. Okay, that we are trying to understand. So as I told, the backend software, these operating systems share the Linux kernel. Okay, typically have the GNU utilities. So Linux operating system, it comes in several distributions to serve different purposes. That means even Windows operating system, we do have a different distributions, right? For example, Windows Vista, Windows XP, Windows 10, Windows 12, Windows 2014, Windows 2016, Windows 2020 server, right? We have a different Windows distributions, right? In the same way, Linux also, we do have a different distributions. We are calling them with a different names. Okay, that we are trying to understand here. You can see these are the different distribution names. So what are these? You can see Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Fedora, Debian, others like a Linux, Mint, Ubuntu, CentOS, OpenSUSE, SUSE Linux Enterprise. Basically, these has been derived into a different distribution softwares. The Linux is the backend software model. So as I told everyone, Linux is a free and open source software system model. Free and open source means I can try to download this Linux operating system over the official websites, and I can try to have an access to the source code, and you can try to modify based on your requirement. That is a benefit over here. So you can try to have these software distributions, used it as part of a workstations. So basically, Red Hat Enterprise Linux is one of the company. They try to download the Linux operating system and they try to redefine and trying to access the source code and modify the source code and trying to develop as part of the requirement. You can see it's a commercial Linux distribution intended for the servers and the workstation. So Red Hat Enterprise Linux is a popular model. Even we do have a certification as well. Even Fedora is it's again sponsored by the Red Hat. It is a foundation for the commercial RHEL. RHEL means Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Debian is an operating system again. It's composed only for free and open source software. And we have a different models like a Ubuntu, Linux, Mint, Sentence. Even these are the different models. This means these distributions, backend software is a Linux, but these has been modified based on different aspects. Like these will have a different features and different GUI. Okay, but the backend software is same. So you can try to have these downloaded as well. All right. So as I told, it is a free and open source, right? In the first slide, we can see that. Linux is a model of free and open source software development and distributions. Everyone can trying to download that as well and trying to use it. Okay. So for example, I'll try to share this. When you try to go to the Linux official website, you can see we have a different popular Linux distribution. This is an official linux.org. It's an official page that will help us to see the different versions of the Linux. You can see there are different versions over here: Ubuntu, CentOS, Debian, Fedora. These are the different Linux operating systems with a different naming conventions. So which you can trying to download that and trying to use it in your computers or in your servers. All right. So you can see this: Ubuntu, CentOS, Debian, Arch, OpenSUSE, Red Hat, Slackle, PureOS. These are the different versions. That means we'll have a different features, or because we have access to free source code, right? You can try to modify based on your requirement, and you can also try to have it your own. These are the famous models that are being available over here. All right. So as I told, how can you try to access Linux? Because I told you, right, Windows operating system is can be accessible over graphical user interface, but Linux can be accessible with a different models. Like, as I told you, it looks like a command line interface. Command line interface. It looks, similar like this, like a screen where you can trying to enter the commands, and the commands will try to perform some specific operations, and that will try to interact with the backend hardware of your hardware. Okay. So the famous software we know, the protocol we are calling as a secured shell tools, remote graphics, Xwin software, SFTP, secure file transfer protocol. These are the various methods you can try to interact with the Linux operating system. Okay, that I'll try to show you in real time how it looks like. Basically, in this tools, which will help you to perform same operations, like a similar operations, how you try to perform with a Windows operating system. Like you will try to open some particular file, delete file, create some folder, or create some file, modify the permissions, and trying to copy the cut, read permissions, write permissions, everything what we do, and trying to install some specific applications, everything what we do in Windows operating system, same way we are trying to do the same operations in the Linux as well. Okay, with the help of a secured shell tools that we are trying to understand soon. So coming to the history, Linux, who is Linux? Okay, so basically the Linux is an operating system. It's a core originally written by Linus Torvalds. Okay, he is the founder and creator. Now almost 10,000 developers, including major technology companies like Intel and IBM, are using Linux as a popular model. Okay, so a set of programs written by Richard Stallman and others, they are nothing but a GNU utilities. So the programs which are actually required to run this Linux operating systems, those programs has been written by Richard Stallman. All right. So those we are calling as a GNU utilities. Okay. Basically, this operating system Linux is nothing but it's like a car engine, right? So a car engine can run on its own, but it becomes functional when the car is connected with a transmission like axles, the wheels, and the gear system. So without the engine running properly, the car doesn't work. In the same way, without the operating system, the computer cannot work. Simply, these operating systems like Windows and Linux are required to interact with the hardware and to have this perform. Okay. So Linux was developed by Linus Torvalds and the programs were developed by Richard Stallman. Okay. Where is Linux? You can see that. Linux is worldwide. It's famous. It is being in World Wide Web. www. 67% of world's web servers runs on the Linux. Okay. And this Linux operating system will be used in most research and high performance compute systems. Famous companies like Google, Amazon, NSA, and 100% of top 500 supercomputers being using this Linux as a popular software model. And even in the current latest technology, modern smartphones and the devices, this Linux operating system being widely used, like Android phones, Amazon Kindle. You might have heard about Amazon Kindle. It's an ebook reader, I think, correct? And the smart TVs and the devices, OTT devices as well. This Linux operating system is being popularly used. All right. So why we need to prefer Linux? Linux is a free and open source model. It is powerful for research and the data centers. Okay. It is personal for desktops and the phones. It is universal and the community and the business driven. Okay. So Linux is used into a different settings and many different use cases as well. Like we can use this Linux as a server operating system and desktop operating system. And server operating system means we can use this Linux as a web server, database server, file server, email servers, and other types of a shared server. Desktop operating system means for the general computing, we can try to use it as it's a freely open source available desktop environment. As I showed you the website, you can try to download that. And you can try to use this Linux software in the network devices like a routers, switches, domain name servers, and various devices as well. Okay. And the software development operating system as well for the software application development for the developers. So Linux is a home to some of the widely most used open source software development tools. Like you might have heard about Git for the distributed source control. So where the source code editing and the compilers and the interpreters and almost every programming language, the Linux being widely used. And in the cloud computing, for a cloud instances, major cloud computing vendors, they are trying to have an access to the Linux operating system for the cloud servers, desktop, and other services. Okay. So Linux is highly configurable and depends on modular design that enables user to customize their own version of Linux. Depending on the application, Linux can be optimized for different purposes, like a networking performance, computing performance, hardware platforms with specific limited memory operations, storage, and the computing resources. That's how it is get famous on. Okay. So as for the Boston University, the most common operating system used by Boston University researchers when working on a server or the computing cluster, this Linux is a widely chosen. All right. Coming to the features, you can see the main first feature we can see simplified updates for all the installed softwares. If you try to compare with the Windows, we do get a Windows updates, right? Like a weekly, monthly, or yearly updates, where you need to update the Windows operating system to have it updated. In the same way, Linux also have a simplified update for all the installed softwares. Okay. And when it comes to the licensing, as I told you, even Windows have a licensed versions, right? You need to purchase the software license, like a Windows corporate versions, like you need to pay some amount, correct? And then Windows is trying to provide some key, and then you will try to activate your Windows operating system in your computers, your laptops. In the same way, Linux also have a licensing, but it is a free software licensing. You doesn't need to pay out. Okay, until there are enterprise software systems, you doesn't require to pay in general. Like Red Hat is a company, they try to develop the software of Linux. They will try to charge, but in general, the normal Linux software systems licensing were free software licensing. And the third feature is nothing but you do have an access to the source code. You do have an access to the source code. That means it is free. Okay, you can trying to have free access to the source code here. I hope everyone are getting to me. You can ask any doubts in the meanwhile in the chat. All right. As I told, the Linux is trying to provide a multiple distributions like a Red Hat, Fedora, and Debian, Ubuntu, Lint, and Mint Linux. There are different software versions that you can try to have access to. It is trying to provide you a better malware protection. Better malware protection means Linux is completely more secure, and because of the software and the algorithms that has been designed for this particular operating system to develop, and it does have a better malware protection. Okay. Any doubts till now? Anyone? You can ask in the chat. Am I clear? All right. So we'll try to understand the terminology and how it looks like. So this is basically the bird's eye view. You can try to have a look. You can see it is designed into a three layers. You can see the the back layer, the middle layer, and the front layer. You can see this. This is the first one. This is the second layer. These are important things to understand. This is the third layer. Okay. So this is the overall bird's eye view for how this operating system is being designed. The topmost, the backend layer is nothing but a kernel. This is the first layer that you can trying to see. The kernel is the one which is trying to interact with the hardware of your computer, or the hardware that is nothing but your system, right? It is trying to interact directly with your operating system hardware. Shell is the middle layer, and that is trying to coordinate between the kernel and the front end. It is a middle layer. And the utilities layer, it is the one which is acts as a front end layer, where users are trying to enter these commands. As I told you, right? These are the commands that we try to enter inside these utilities. That means various shell tools, SSH tools, I told you, right? These are the SSH tools where we will try to open this SSH command line interface tool. We will try to enter these commands being interpreted by shell, and shell is the one forward the commands to backend kernel, and then kernel will try to respond to the shell will try to provide the input to the front end users. That means we are the users who are trying to enter these commands inside the keyboard. We'll try to type that from our end, and these commands being interpreted by shell will try to interact with the backend kernel and try to provide you the input. Okay. We will try to understand these three layers. What are the information about that? So basically, kernel is nothing but a core of the Linux system. The kernel handles the network access, schedule process of applications, manage basic peripheral devices, and overall all the file system services like a device access, multitasking, file system like a CPU, RAM management, everything that is trying to handle by the kernel. So basically, the kernel is a software that interfaces directly with the computer hardware. Is that clear? So basically, in the Windows, what we see, you might have heard about Windows. Windows, we have a boot process, right? Boot and bootloader. Anyone heard about this? During the installation, the library files. In the same way, Linux also have the same concept, right? So that is where this comes into a picture of the kernel, correct? So basically, bootloader concept also there here. Bootloader is responsible for managing the boot process of the computer and starting for the this particular Linux kernel. Okay. So basically, this kernel can also be used to manage systems that boot more than operating system. Okay. So kernel is the main core of the Linux system, which is handling the backend hardware aspects. Is that clear? We will try to learn about Linux as well soon. Okay. And the shell is the tool, like where it is trying to interface with the Linux, where we are trying to use these tools in the front end, like a shell tool, bash tools. We are calling that as a shell scripting, bash scripting. So whatever the commands we are trying to enter, that is being entered over the shell tools. So that we are trying to see and understand. So, okay. So basically, first we'll try to concentrate on the kernel. As I told you, kernel is the core of the Linux operating system, right? So basically, you can see the kernel is a backend layer. What it is trying to manage, the kernel is trying to interact with the hardware. Hardware components means like a CPU, memory, and the devices, right? So these information being handled by the kernel, and then it will try to pass on to the application. So what is a kernel? The computer programs that allocates the system resources and coordinates all the details of a computer internals is called the operating system or the kernel. So kernel is the managed one. Users communicate with operating system through a program called the shell. So shell is the one, we are the users, we are trying to interact with the computer through the shell. So shell is the one trying to take the information from the kernel. What information? Like all the hardware related information, like a CPU, memory, devices, file management, hardware resources. Okay, that's what we are trying to understand. So Linux is a low level system software whose main role is to manage the hardware resources for the user. It is the core for any operating system, and it is responsible for translating the user commands into equivalent language understood by the computer hardware. As I told you, right? We are the users who are trying to enter the commands from the keyboard, and whatever the commands we are trying to enter over the command line interface, those are commands being taken care by the kernel, and kernel will try to translate into the language understood by the kernel, I mean computer hardware. We can see that. That's what the main aspect that we are trying to understand. Okay, and the next step is shell. You can see this is a computer hardware, and this is a kernel. We have understood kernel is the one which manages the hardware aspects. Now the next immediate layer is nothing but a shell. Okay, what is a shell? The shell is a program that takes the command from the keyboard and passes them to the operating system from performing. So I am the user, I am trying to enter the commands, okay, over the command line interface, right? Like a command 1, command 2, command 3, command 4. These commands will taken by the shell. Shell is the one which is trying to have it processed. So shell is the program that takes commands from the keyboard and passes them to the operating system for performing. Okay. So shell was the only mode for communicating with the kernel via the CLI. What is a CLI? CLI is nothing but a command line interface. Okay. So these shell, bash are the tools which are being have operated with the help of a commands. So we are calling that as a shell script, bash script. Okay, bash is an advanced version, like a born again shell. It is the replacement of a original shell. Okay, so bash combines the features of original shell plus additional functionality to make it easier and more convenient to use. Okay, shell is also command line interface tool. Bash is also command line interface tool, but it is nothing but an advanced version. That's it. Okay, it is trying to have an advanced functionality. Okay, bash has been adopted as the default shell for most Linux systems. All right, so kernel is the one, the backend layer, and the mid layer is nothing but a shell. Shell will try to take the inputs from the users that we are trying to enter from the keyboard. It will try to process to the kernel in the background operating system. Okay, this is all about kernel and the shell. I hope everyone are getting understand, right? So, so shell is a command line interpreter. It translates the command entered by the user and converts them into a language that is understood by the kernel that we have already seen. Okay, so you can see this is how it looks like. The shell tool, it looks like this. You can see that it is similar like a black screen, or the command line interface tool. You are trying to enter the commands in this. So basically, the program that interprets commands and send them to the operating system. Who is operating system here? Send them to the operating system means which is being handled by the kernel here. Correct? Whatever the commands we are trying to have it is trying to interpret the commands and send them to the operating system. Okay. So it is a program that interprets the commands and send them to the operating system. That is the backend kernel. Okay. So what does shell provides? It provides built-in commands. Built-in commands means whatever the commands that we are trying to enter inside this particular shell interface, programming control structures, and the environment variables. Linux supports multiple shells, right? As I told you, Bash is one kind of a software that is trying to support it. Okay. So if you see this picture, he is the user who is trying to enter the commands from the keyboard, takes input from the user. So shell will try to translate the commands. Like whatever the commands you are trying to enter in this tool, this shell is the program that is trying to translate the commands. How it is going to translate? The language understand by the kernel. So basically, the computer understand which language? The binary language, right? Binary language. So whatever the user is trying to enter the commands, like the kernel cannot understand. So it is being translated. The commands being translated by this in the form of usually the kernel or the operating system will understand the commands like binary numbers like 0 1 1 0, like only zeros and ones, right? So this shell translate the commands like understand by the kernel into the equivalent language in the kernel, right? Binary language, right? So basically, it is trying to translate the commands understand by the kernel. So the basic concept of a shell script is a list of commands which are listed in the order of execution. Okay, a good shell script will have a comments preceded by hash symbol describing the steps. That means here you can see this screen. After this symbol, you are trying to enter the commands. These commands by translated and which is into the language that is understood by the kernels. That is nothing but a binary language in the background. Okay, this is all about the shell information. Okay, so next, let's try to understand the basic differences. All right, between the Linux and Windows. You can see in the Windows we have a different types of users, right? Like administrator user, standard user, child user, guest user. Correct. So in the same way, Linux also have a different users. That means regular user we are calling as a root user. I mean regular user is a normal user, and we have an administrative user that is nothing but a root user who performs all the administrative actions, and the service user or the guest user we can call that. These are the differences what we can see. Basically, we already know that Windows is also a licensing operating system which is designed for the individuals with the perspective of having no computer programming knowledge for the business and other commercial users, right? So Linux is also such kind of a thing, but there are similar differences in terms of a users. Okay, Windows is an graphical user interface operating system, but Linux is a command line interface operating system. That's it, and both will performing the same operations. That's it. And one more difference you can see, Linux is very stable and more secure than Windows. Any new problems that can be raised, it can be solved within few hours, and the necessary patch can be ready at the same time. That means Linux operating system is more stable and secure when compared to the Windows. Okay, because any issues coming into the operating system level, they do have a different patches or that can be resolved very quick, and it can be ready and installed very within of a time. But Windows we have a software issues like in terms of a set stability and security issues, because Windows being widely used, right? Because most of the people around the world are trying to use it. So hackers, spammers target Windows operating system frequently because it is widely hacked. but Linux is very, hardly getting hacked because it is having a different encryption, military grade encryption algorithms. That is, hackers cannot try to hack it very easily. Okay, it does have a very good security methods that is being defined compared to the Windows operating system. Okay. And if we try to see some more examples, Linux systems come with an option of built-in military grade encryption. As I told you, users can be sure that devices theft poses no real problem to the data. That means even if you have any issues, like for example, you have any device, okay, that is having a Linux operating system, that is theft, that is lost. So that doesn't have any issue with your data. Your data is still secure and you doesn't have any problem with your data because it is coming with a built-in military grade encryption that is trying to make sure no one can easily hack and trying to access your data. That is the assurance that Linux operating system trying to provide. Okay, so Windows have some some options they are trying to work on to avoid such kind of an issues. Windows can also watch what users do. Okay, offering syncing to the Microsoft OneDrive service or to learn user behavior to improve upon Cortana. These are some differences between Linux and Windows. As I told you, Linux is an open source model. Users have access to the source code. Windows is a proprietary model. Only selected individuals have access to the source code. Okay, that means if you try to purchase the copyright versions, and then also only the selected individuals like Windows developers only have an access to the source code. You can't try to modify and trying to use it. If you try to crack the software and trying to use it, and your support won't be there, correct? But Linux is not like that. You have an access to the open source code and you can try to modify based on your requirements and the projects. These are like a differences when compared to the Windows and Linux. All right. If you see some more differences, the GNU utilities, as I told you, what are the utilities? Like what are the commands we are trying to enter inside the shell tools. All right. The utilities and the libraries which accompany it is in most Linux are entirely free. Okay, as I told you, the utilities and the library files that is entirely free. But in Windows, Microsoft Windows usually cost between $99 and above $199 in USD for each license copy. As you might aware, for a proper Windows software you need to purchase from Microsoft company, you need to pay some money, right? You have to pay the money. So that is a licensed version that you can see. So you have to pay money. So not Linux is not like that. You can try to download, you can try to use it based on your requirement. As we have a different software license distributions that are being available on the website as well. You can try to download it and use it on safe. One more difference you can see, within minutes of posting a thread on any of the Linux forums, you might expect a reply along with a solution at no cost. For example, you are using a Linux operating system. You have some issues on some exact example for some operations or some commands. What you do is simply you can try to go to some official website of this Linux. You can see this. There are some forums. Okay. Actually, you can see this. I'm trying to open this forums, right? If you try to post some information or the queries, for example, some issues, general queries. Okay. You can try to type it over here. They will try to respond very quickly. Okay. Anyone who is actually having experience on that, they can try to have it very quickly and trying to respond you with some information. For example, you can see this. You can see this. You see, these are nothing but a forums, general forums. Okay. If you're trying to post some query here about your question related to the operating system, they will try to quickly reply with an answer. Okay. With some commands, they will try to help you. That is what they are trying to mention. It is very easy, useful feature that is being provided like a support from them. Like any queries that you try to post in this particular website, you will try to expect a reply very quick. Okay. Within minutes of posting a thread on any of the Linux forums, you might expect a reply along with a solution at no cost. But unlike in Windows, you have, because even you need to get a support for Windows operating system, you need to purchase a license copy, you need to pay the money. Like Windows has a support which is easily accessible through any device, online forums or the websites. It has a paid support as well, but you need to pay, right? You need to have a paid support. That means you need to pay some amount, correct? That's when you will try to get a support, like a in-depth, personal support. Okay, these are like basic differences when you try to compare with the Linux and Windows operating system. So how do you access the Linux? You can see it's simple. As you can see, the very first thing you can see here, this is what the prompt it looks like. Here you need to enter your username at the rate of server name, host name, or the system name here, like a computer IP address. And this particular symbol shows in which folder you are in, and there will be dollar sign or the hash sign. After this, you will try to enter all your commands. What are the commands? The commands which will be under the utilities. Those we are calling as the Linux commands. Okay. Once you try to learn the Linux codes, you will learn the commands, and those commands you are trying to type here, which will try to perform specific operations. All right. That going to be really helpful for that. So this is how the interface looks like. I'll try to show you in real time how it looks like. Username, the server name, and this is where the folder name that is trying to show you here, the current directory, and the input what you try to mention. Okay. So how the Linux file system looks like, the structure resembles an upside down tree. That means these are the folders. It is trying to show you an upside down. That means this is the top folder. These are the subfolders. This is the child folders. You can see directories we are calling as parent folder, root directory, parent folder, subfolder, and the child folders. This is nothing but a upside down tree. It is nothing but a tree structure, like a tree having a branches, right? These we are calling as a directories. Directories are a collections of files and other directories. Every directory has a parent except the root directory. Okay. Every directory has a parent directory except the root directory. This is the top directory, that is number the root directory. Under the root directory, we have a parent directory. Under the parent directory, we have a subdirectories. Okay. Many directories have a subdirectories. But in Windows, how do we have? For example, this is a Windows C. These are the folders. Inside the folders, we have a subfolders, and inside the subfolders, we are trying to have a child folders, right? Right? These are the child, all the system folders and everything we can see. In the same way, Linux also have a folders. That is nothing but how it looks like. Okay. So for example, this is a root folder. Under the root folder, we have a home folder. Under the home folder, we have a my user folder. Under the user folder, we have a child folder, that is no backup, and insert the scratch. You can see this is how it looks like, the folder structure. We can access these folders with the help of a commands. Okay. In real time, this is how it looks like. I mean, the Linux, how it looks like. This is a root folder. Under the root folder, we have a different structure. You can see /bin, /etc, /user, /var, /bin. These are the parent folders, how it looks like. You can see boot folder, etc folder will contains all the configuration files. User folder will contains all the information like share folder, bin folder, lib, sbin, and variable data files. It will have a different files. System binary files will have a binary file information, home directory, library files, root files, and everything. You can see that this is how the structure looks like. Basically, it is nothing but a tree like a structure. The root is a main directory. Under the root directory, we have a parent directories and the child directories and everything. You can see that. Okay. Okay. This is how it looks like. So basically, we need to access these folders. For example, in the Windows, we are trying to click, right? We are trying to click some folder. It will try to take you some, inside this folder, correct? But when it comes to Linux, you need to access these folders with the help of a commands. We have a different commands that will try to take you inside this particular Linux operating system. Okay, that's commands. We will try to see how these basic commands we will try to see soon. Okay. So, so how these commands will be helpful? You can see small programs that do one thing well, correct? So that means programs are nothing but commands that are trying to perform specific operations. You can see for networking, operations. For example, in my Windows, if I have to ping some website, I can try to type ping space google.com, correct? It will try to give me some response, correct? In the same way, Linux also we have some network commands. We can use SSH command, SAP ping command, telnet, nslookup, wget, right? Shell commands. These are the shell commands. If you want to see the system of information of your Linux operating system, you can type w, who am I, man, info, which. These are the commands you can try to see the system commands, system information. And these are the symbols to perform some specific input output redirections. These are the filter commands like a grep command, egrep, more, less, head, tail. These are the hotkeys and file system commands. Like you want to create some file, you want to create some folder, you want to create some user, you want to create some group, you want to move some file, you can try to delete some information, or you want to give a file permissions. These are the system commands. These are the editor commands, file editor commands. You can see these are the various commands that will try to help you out to perform the operations inside the Linux, operating system. Whatever you are trying to do in the Windows operating system, the same information that you are trying to do and gather with the help of a Linux operating system as well. All right. For example, if you want to install any software inside the Windows operating system, what you will try to do? You will try to simply download some software over the Google or internet. So those softwares will be in the form of exe files. For example, you want to download some software or the game. What you will do? You will try to download some zip file or the exe file and trying to click on install and click on next. Correct? But in Linux, what you will do? You will try to install any softwares with some specific commands. Right? If I want to install some specific database software like an SQL, what I'll try to type? Simply I'll type yum space install space the software name. You can see the example yum space install space Python software. It will try to install Python software to you. If you type yum space install space Microsoft Outlook or SQL, I can try to type yum space install space SQL. It will try to install some database to your operating system. Are we understanding, right? So this is how we can try to efficiently use this Linux operating system. All right. So I'll just try to show you how this Linux Kernel interface looks like. So basically, this Linux is considerable as a reliable operating system and which is supported with the security patches and which is considered to be stable so that it can be run into most different aspects and into different circumstances. Okay. So for example, I'll try to launch a sample Linux operating system. You know, you can try to install. For example, you can try to download software and trying to install in your own computer. I'm trying to launch a Linux virtual server inside cloud environment. Okay, I'll show you how it looks like. I'll try to show you the basic commands. So this is a AWS console. Okay, inside the AWS cloud, I'm launching a sample Linux server. Okay, basically you can try to install this Linux operating system in your own computers as well, or the virtually over any virtual server as well. Okay, server is nothing but a virtual computer that you can try to deploy over the cloud environment. So what are the main advantages of the Linux? It is an, like, just to sum up the session, it is an open source operating system. That means source code is easily available for everyone and allowed to contribute, modify and distribute the code to anyone without any permissions. Okay. In terms of security as well, Linux is more secure, okay, than any operating system, right? And the software updates in Linux are also very easy and frequent. And you can try to design your Linux distribution based on your requirement according to your project, and it is freely available to use it over the internet. It has a large community support as well. It provides high stability. That means it doesn't get slow up or the freeze like Windows. Okay. And there is no need to reboot, and it will try to quickly back up after a short time. It maintains the privacy of the user. That is one more advantage. Okay. And in terms of a performance, the performance of the Linux server is much higher than any other operating system. It allows a larger number of people to work at the same time and handles them efficiently. And Linux operating system is user friendly, and the flexibility of Linux is high. There is no need to install a complete Linux suite. You're just allowed to install specific components. And Linux is compatible with large number of file formats. It is fast and easy to install from the web. It can also install in any hardware, even on your old computer systems as well, like old systems be there, right? So it performs all tasks properly, even if it has a limited space on the hard disk. These are the main advantages of the Linux. You can see this is a Amazon Linux distribution, how it looks like. As I told you here, username, correct? This is a username we can try to do at the rate. This is the main IP address of the system host name. This is the directory, like a folder where you are in. And after this dollar, you can try to type all the commands what you are trying to do. You can see that I'm trying to enter the commands where I can try to see the commands, right? If I want to ping some google.com, it is trying to take the command and trying to show me the response. I'm getting a response. So I can try to execute different commands for the different purpose. All right. So these commands will try to help you out, which will try to understand and trying to interact with the operating system. Okay. So for example, you can see this is a username, the IP address. This is the folder name. The folder name means in this current folder where I am in, I am trying to have some access to the particular data. Okay. So sudo su is a command which will try to make you log in as a root user. That means nothing but a super user. Okay. This is a command to make you log in as a super user, like a root user, which will try to make you perform administrative operations. That means root operations. You can see that when I'm trying to enter, this is a root user. It got changed as a root user. Root user is nothing but he have all the privileges to perform specific operations. Correct? So I'm inside this folder, right? So CD is nothing but a change directory. I'm into this directory. If I want to move to any other directory, I can simply try to enter the CD. It will try to change my directory. In Windows, what do we do? If I'm this directory, if I want to go back to this directory, what I'll do, I'll try to click on simply click. Correct? I'll click. That's it. But in Linux, it's not like that. If I want to move from one directory to another directory, I need to enter the CD command. CD is a command to change the directory from one location to another location. Okay. Okay. So for example, if I want to type cd space /home, you can see I'm going back to the home directory. I'm trying to go back to the home directory, cd change directory home. If I want to go to ec2-user directory, what is the command I need to again? cd space ec2-user. You can see my the directory has been changed. The last section of this will try to show you the folder information. Okay, these are the folders. You can try to create a number of folders. You can try to create a number of files based on your wish. Okay. So inside this folder, I can try to create different files as well. For example, I'm into this folder, right? I will use some command to create some files. cat space. I can try to create file one. You can see the file is created. I can try to enter some command inside this file. If I want to see the content inside this file, you can see my data has been there. So inside, I created a file called file one. Inside the file, I have entered the information as hello world. So there are different set of commands which will be helpful us to understand and trying to operate and trying to work on this Linux. So tomorrow we will try to see the basic commands, how we can try to enter in this shell. Okay, this is a shell interface. We are trying to have access through the operating system. Okay, this is all about Linux. I hope everyone got a clarity and understanding on the basics, right? So tomorrow we will try to understand and just go through, the basic commands, Linux administrations, how we can try to see more commands as well. Okay, let me know if anyone had any doubts as we got, time. I hope everyone got a clarity. Any doubts? Was session worthful?
Yeah, thank you, Bala.
Yep.
So somebody is asking attendance, so we are not taking any attendance. We just watch the live session. That's it. Yeah, we will wind up the session, Balchandra. Thank you.
Yes.
We'll
Thank
meet
you.
tomorrow. Yeah.